Arturo.
Hello, everyone. Just a second, I'm opening my camera so I can have a peek. Perfect. Hello, everyone. I am Arturo Osorio. I am a professor, associate professor at Rutgers Business School in the area of entrepreneurship, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all this morning.
Wonderful to see you, Arturo. He's my next door neighbor in the office. Pam.
Good morning, everyone. It's Pam Salito with Audible. I hope everybody's doing well.
Oh, great to see you. Tendai.
Good morning, everyone.
You want to say who you're with, Tendai?
Tendai Ndoro with New Jersey Small Business Development Center under Rutgers Business School.
Excellent, thank you. Nalini. Nalini, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Nalini Kumaran. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here, but glad to be in this working group. And I am a HR professional with a master's in human resource management from Rutgers. So I'm a Rutgers alumni. I look forward to working with this group, and it's been a wonderful session so far. And I'm learning a lot and hope to contribute in the field of HR.
Fantastic, thank you. Mukesh.
Yes, hi, good morning. Mukesh Patel, faculty at Rutgers Business School and the Law School. I run the Innovation Lab and the Technology Commercialization Program. Happy to be here, always looking at what the future of work is evolving into and will continuously to change in this crazy world. Thank you. Also a Rutgers alumni.
Absolutely, another colleague, wonderful. Did I miss anyone? Because people are still joining. I see a lot of people joining. So if I missed you. Okay, so just enter your information in the chat if you wouldn't mind. And I'm going to kick off our 2-hour meeting today with a recap. I'm going to attempt to summarize what we've done in the last year. Which is not easy, but I won't be able to do justice to everything that we've covered. Pretty much everything is in the Google Drive table of contents, where we have accumulated just enormous amount of relevant information. We've covered so much territory. I just want to say I'm grateful for all of your contributions and participation. We have made great progress, and we have many miles still to go. Next slide. Great, thank you. So I just want to go over the agenda. I'm going to spend roughly 20 minutes summarizing highlights of what we've been doing for the last year. I think most of you were involved in most of it or some of it. Some of you may be new, and so I'll just do a high-level recap. We'll do more summary going forward. And then we had come up with this wonderful idea at the last meeting to really reinvent the employment contract, we called it. And that has evolved to our key initiative for 2022, which we will start today in our breakouts, is to build a new framework for responsible business practices. And we'll say more about that. And according to our 4-pillar model in the RICSE's corporate social innovation, we had initially included, but not limited, responsible business practices to include environment, social, and governance, ESG, which has been taking off astronomically in the world of business in the last year. And a lot of talk about paying a living wage. And we have some compensation experts here, actually. We're going to include DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in it, which we've talked about throughout this entire project, and stakeholder capitalism. So after my recap, we're going to do 2 rounds. The first round will be facilitated by, well, both rounds will be facilitated by our colleagues Youngmi Park, as well as Sam Cayucci and Sharon Hellman. I'm not sure if John Sarno is here. If not, I will facilitate that one. So the first round will focus on external investors and shareholders and managers and boards and government. The second round, after we do a 15-minute readout, and I'll go through the questions in a second, will focus on customers, employees, executives, and communities. And with respect to this new framework for responsible business practices, we have 3 questions that will be the key questions for each of the respective breakout sessions. And we don't want to limit it to that, but these will be the starter questions that we'll be facilitating. With regard to that stakeholder group and that issue of building responsible business practices, what are the biggest challenges in this stakeholder group to tackle these issues? Second, which organizations, both corporate and otherwise, are tackling this issue and doing it well? And we've highlighted a lot of those during this last year and in our various documents. And what are some opportunities to address the issue locally, nationally, and globally? So we really wanted to give you time for some deep dive thinking about these questions. So we're going to do 30 minutes for each round, 15 minutes report outs, and then we're going to capture it all. We do have a Google Excel spreadsheet, which Deborah will share. If you don't like doing it that way, you could do it whatever way you want, and we'll import it into the Google spreadsheet. And then we'll close with next steps. Thank you. All right, next slide. So where did this start? We spent, the students, including Edith, who's with us today, and a number of other students, spent the better part of last summer, the summer before last, working on a very comprehensive report. I think it was 46 pages on the future of work and COVID-19. And that culminated in a symposium on the next slide, which we held on March 26th. And at that point, we identified 5 key ways to build back better, leveraging corporate social innovation. The first one was supporting employee mental health. And in that regard, what we focused on was that mental health issues are not always visible. And so we need to have more candid conversations. Employers need to lead by example and show that it is okay not to be okay. And we saw some wonderful examples of that more recently with the Olympics, et cetera. And the pandemic has also shown us the importance and need for employee resource groups. Volunteering has been very beneficial for employee mental health. So a lot of work around mental health, and we've seen that continuing. The second area was in reskilling for the long term, and that's where we have continued through this entire initiative. Some of the key things we identified that have been reinforced is that employee training needs to be continuous and lifelong. We worked on government and tax codes and things related to that, finding that some of them were severely outdated. We also highlighted that corporations need to back off the strict requirement that applicants have to have previously performed the exact tasks that are needed for the vacant job, and hire people for broad skills and soft skills, now called power skills, smart people, and then train them for their specific job with a period to ramp up. We also talked at that point about a learning and development savings account that could be created with matching company funds, and we have evolved that significantly throughout this process. Other topics we talked about were educating for tomorrow's workforce, and we also got into DEI and sustainability and the environment. Interesting relative to sustainability and environment, a lot of what we focused on was supply chain, which obviously has now turned into a major issue. And relative to diversity and inclusion, we highlighted the intersectional nature of the challenges and the critical role for measurement, which has come to the fore. And I'm glad Amy is here because that's a lot of her focus, to focus on how to measure a DEI culture, how to create it and measure it. So that was how we kind of came into this. And then next slide. What we did was we set up this working group. We have, I believe, 125 people that have been signed on to this who are interested and participating. And what we really wanted to do is to really create meaningful and equitable employment in the context of the future of work, with specific emphasis on skills development, focusing on skills for all stakeholders in society in a foundation of the principles and practices for enhancing social responsibility, sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we set about, on the next slide, with these goals specifically, and I have to say, I think we have really addressed, and maybe not achieved, but we certainly have addressed all of these, and that's what I'll briefly summarize right now. So we have enormous amount of information about the current situation. We have specifics down to very specific from the NJBIA, Business and Industry Association. It's all on the documents in the Google Drive by industry, et cetera. We have begun to identify the critical skills, and I'll be talking about that and how we're going to go about that. And we have identified pathways, and we'll talk more about that, for skill development. We've talked about the barriers and the opportunities, and we have proposed at least 3 or 4 viable solutions that we'll be moving forward with in 2022. So just to set the context, I think we all see that we are at an inflection point regarding not just how work is done, but also what work is done. What is the critical work that needs to be done to address our societal challenges, to address the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as how work is done and where work is done. So we've covered all of those: what, how, and where. Maybe not so much why, but that would be also relevant. There's no more old normal. We are seeing rapid pace of change every day. We have seen, and I can verify based on what I've seen personally, that employees are extremely stressed and burnt out and searching for meaning and purpose in their work. So Aaron D. Smet talked about adaptability as a meta skill as we learn how to become more adaptable, flexible, and resilient. And we've at various times incorporated sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals, as the challenge of the century, as well as the tremendous opportunity for us to contribute. So my plea and our role is to seize this opportunity to simultaneously address the societal challenges that are before us while we build responsible business practices for the future of work. Next slide. So why do we need to reskill the American workforce? I don't think I need to go into this, but in great detail, we did a whole white paper on this, which is posted on long-term unemployment and some of the barriers to that, and how we can overcome the unconscious and other biases related to the long-term unemployed. We're looking at job turnover, and we have a lot of statistics and evidence about that. We're seeing a nomadic trend where people are relocating. And we have seen evidence that employee engagement has been on a steady decline. And what we are proposing is that we reframe work as a calling, much as Andrew Hoffman wrote in his book on the same topic, and as he covered in our Prime conference not too long ago, that work should be a calling. All work is a calling in service of society. Next slide. So along the way, we introduced our Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation 4-pillar model. And that is really the frame for what a lot of the work we've been doing. And the corporate social innovation is at the intersection of all 4 of these pillars, starting with giving back to society, where we have covered. Ann Wu talked about corporate social responsibility and corporate volunteering at Samsung. We've talked about philanthropy. Purpose, purpose-driven companies and purpose-driven organizations. We've highlighted those. And today we're really focusing mostly on the 3rd pillar of engaging in responsible business practices. As I said, focusing on ESG, paying a living wage, DEI, and stakeholder capitalism. And we've done quite a bit of advocacy. We even met with Senator Booker's office on our ideas for the individual training accounts and influencing public policy. So you all contributed to all of that, and the work continues. So these are some of the things that we talked about related to reskilling in terms of the government roles and tax codes. We, as I mentioned, have focused on the importance, and Peter Capelli definitely emphasized, and in his book, Why Smart People Can't Get Jobs, talked about that we need to really change the way we think about the hiring process, and we had a meeting about that. And we've talked, and Sam has been tremendously valuable in helping us understand the technology's disruptive impact and the role we need to play relative to that, and how companies are looking to train people and within their walls, as well as even after they leave, and looking at outskilling as well as upskilling and reskilling. Next slide. We did have a panel with several people and Ram is on the call today. And Ram talked about a wonderful Ripple program, and that they're bold goals. Ram, do you want to say a word about that? Because since you're right here, I don't want to speak for you.
Oh, sure. The EY Ripples program, creating impacts or ripples. There are various targets in terms of reaching out to people. So it has worked with various non-government, NGOs and the public sector organizations to reach out in terms of volunteering. It could be from the education side, the ESG, or helping public sector organizations on grants, various things. I mean, there's like hundreds of lists I can send later on.
Yeah, maybe you can send a link in the chat. Thank you so much. If anybody wants to put any links, because I'm not be able to do justice to any of your work. We had a really interesting presentation from Leslie Hirsch from the NJ Department of Labor, who filled us in on a lot of the different programs that were going on, and Ann Wu from Samsung talked about some of their programs. I want to call everybody's attention to, in the Google Drive table of contents, the NJ government documents. We have information there on Governor Murphy's Future of Work Task Force, the State Office of Innovation Accelerator Curriculum. We have work on information on the NJ Pay It Forward program, New Jersey's Good Jobs Challenge, and other programs. So lots of information on what's going on relative to government. We also, at that point, started talking about the portable individual training accounts. We have a ton of information on that. We did research and summarized it. John Sarno summarized it. I'm not sure if he's here today. and a whole paper on how that could actually be introduced. And then Sam talked about technology's role. If you want to go to the next slide. Since Sam is here, these were the three huge big points that Sam made. You want to say a few words about those?
Sure. Yeah, I think that, some of the stuff that we discussed, on these points, specifically meeting workers where they are today, only 1% of workforce training is mobile first. Legacy learning platforms for the last 30 years have been designed desktop only. So the migration to mobile first is a challenge made more difficult by labor rules that were written at a time before the expectation of mobile technology. The second was leveraging the late advancements in learning science. There's a tremendous amount of research over the last decade talking specifically about struggle-based learning methods and how to optimize learning for speed for workers who don't have much time to get ready for work. I think that's an opportunity. And then finally, how do we make the invisible visible regarding credentials, where so many workers today have informal credentials that are hidden in the recruiting process? How do we use technology to help workers surface what they know to help them navigate recruiting pathways?
And that's the perfect segue to some of the things we're going to talk about with ETS. I think the next slide also covers some of the things Sam covered. Go ahead, Sam.
Sure. We did have a great session sharing a little bit, and it was a great opportunity for me to share a little bit about what we are doing here in Newark with Huddle, using game-based learning as a way to make workforce training not just more accessible, but more, dare we say, fun and interactive, which is that's not a bad F word. How do we use fun in the process to make work training something people want to do? Built on a reality that the majority of workers in the coming years are going to be millennial and Gen Z. And a data point that got my business started was that by the age of 21, an average millennial will have spent over 10,000 hours on a game platform. So leveraging existing behaviors in order to better connect with our workers to make the experience enjoyable.
Great, thank you. So segueing now to the focus on the skills. What are the skills? So it started off with a wonderful presentation by Kathy Calvin. She spoke at the symposium, who was the former CEO of the United Nations Foundation. And just off the top of her head, she talked about being collaborative and not competitive, being willing to stand up and speak up, resilience, recovering from setbacks, working from a place of purpose and meaning, and having a commitment to being a champion for the SDGs. So I'm on board with all of those. And then we started looking at some other research. PwC has done a tremendous amount of work in this area, published tons of articles. We have them all on there. But what they focused on in this initial survey was the key skills of problem solving and the ability to learn new skills and apply them quickly. And then adaptability, which was then reinforced by Aaron DeSmet's presentation, where he was calling adaptability the meta skill that we all need. And then we looked at the McKinsey research, which was very extensive, and they identified 56 foundational skills across 13 skill groups. And as you can see, they were organized into the cognitive areas, which included critical thinking, planning, mental flexibility, interpersonal, which included working with teams, developing relationships, mobilizing systems, win-win negotiations, excuse me, self-leadership, which included some of the emotional intelligence things like self-awareness, self-management, as well as, interestingly enough, entrepreneurship, courage, risk-taking, and the digital skills. including digital fluency, software use. I'm sure AI is in there somewhere, cybersecurity, et cetera. So then we found our way to ETS, which is now, unfortunately, today, Laura and David were called away to another meeting. And that we've been working very closely with them and looking to actually partner with them on this platform that they've developed. They've done a tremendous amount of work, which is completely aligned with what we're about, which is using skills to empower economic mobility for all. So looking to identify, as Sam just mentioned, how people can signal their transferable skills to enable economic mobility so that we can be more inclusive, because you might not have all your skills listed and most people don't even recognize their skills. And so ETS did a wonderful presentation, which is posted as well, on 3 buckets of skills to impact job performance. These are transferable skills that are intrinsically tied to job performance across industries and functions, and together serve as equalizing measures of individual ability and future potential. And what they have looked at is they organize them into 3 categories of foundational skills, which are necessary to build higher order cognitive and technical skills desired by employers, and power skills. Power skills are what we used to call, or what I have always called, soft skills, which are really the hard skills. These are the socio-emotional skills or personality traits that measure people's natural inclination towards certain behaviors. And then cognitive skills. So they have foundational skills, power skills, and cognitive skills. These are the ones that require more complex thought processes and encompass many of the skills that employers are looking for. And so based on all that, ETS built a suite of transferable skills assessments that can enable a truly holistic, skills-based labor marketplace, empowering economic mobility for all. So we are going to be continuing to work with ETS on that. And then just to complete this in the next couple of minutes. So we also heard from Peter Capelli at our last meeting, and he reinforced some of the things that employees want going forward and that employers need to do. So they want flexibility, clearly. They want a more flexible working model, and you could see the statistics there from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, with 52% of people preferring hybrid, 37% on-site, and 11% for fully remote. We have employees continuing to be disgruntled. Only 42% are, which is actually higher than I would have thought, are thriving, with some people just sort of checked out or ambivalent. Next slide. So just to reinforce where I started with this conversation, people are looking for purpose, value, and meaningful work. And I believe, and many of you, I think, will concur, that addressing the challenging issues of society, which are in the Sustainable Development Goals, is really the calling we have of our time. And people can derive this purpose and meaning from 4 different levels, but for holistic meaningfulness, not just the job needs meaningfulness, but the organization needs meaningfulness. There has to be a purpose to the organization that serves some larger purpose. And if the only purpose is to make a profit, that's not sufficient anymore. It has to have something that serves both society as well as the business. And we're looking for interactional meaningfulness. That's the connectedness that we're all just craving. The job itself needs to be connected to that larger picture, and the tasks need to be that you're doing, so people understand the line of sight between what they're doing and how it. I'm reminded of the famous story of the 2 men. One is just laying bricks, and the other one, when you say, "What are you doing?" he's also laying bricks, but what he says is, "I'm building a cathedral." So we need to build a cathedral regardless of the tasks that people are doing. And finally, last slide before the breakouts, we're finding that employees will pay for these. So from a compensation perspective, people are valuing and will value the compensation associated with unlimited vacation time, flexible work hours. And so all this needs to be translated into the financial models for much more flexibility in what we're offering, as well as we even see their extensive mental health benefits. So I'm going to turn to our breakouts now, but I know that was a lot to cover and I ran a little bit over, but do we have any comments or questions before we go to the breakouts where you'll have a chance to talk? And I was not monitoring the chat. Anybody want to comment on everything I just covered?
That was a fantastic overview, Gina. I really appreciated that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was could not do justice to everything we've covered, but I appreciate I did my best. Other comments?
Good refresher and summary. Thanks, Gina.
Thanks, Ram. I'm so happy to see you. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to break up into 4 groups. You can choose which group you're interested in. The first round will be focused, and you don't have to be in this stakeholder to know about what you want to say about it. The first round will be focused on investors, shareholders, and investors in companies, and that will be facilitated by Young Mi Park. And that's group 1. Group 2 will be facilitated by Sam Couchy. It'll be focused on what do managers need to how do they need to address these issues, and with using the 3 questions at the bottom. And the third group will be facilitated by Sharon Hellman on boards. And the fourth one, I don't think John is with us. Sadly, he had a death in the family, so I'm not sure if he's here today. So I'll do government. And then we'll come back in 30 minutes. So we're going to come back at 5 after 11. Okay. And we're going to debrief. And Deborah, can you explain the Google Sheet?
Of course. I just pasted the link to the Google Sheet in the chat. And let me just share my screen so everyone can see what this looks like. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So you'll see that there's 2 separate sheets for round 1 and for round 2. In column A, you will see all of the questions, and then the other columns are for each group. So the first group, which is for investors, is column B, boards, column C, managers, column D, and government, column E. And so please, if you are comfortable, feel free to just jot down notes for each one of these questions in these in the row that corresponds to what group you're in. And this is again on our Google Drive, so it will be accessible throughout the entire session as well as in the future.
Okay, can you put the link to the Google Drive in the chat?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, you don't have to use this Google Drive thing. I know some people don't like doing stuff like, so if you, whatever you want to do to capture your thoughts, if you just want to, so that you can have somebody read out. It doesn't have to be the facilitator. So somebody just ask for somebody to be your note taker and to do the readout. Okay. All right. So we're going to break into the groups now, and we'll see you in, you can choose which group you go into. I think it's set up that, can they move, Deborah, as well from group to group?
Yes, so
Yeah.
the rooms will be open, and so you will be able to choose whatever room you want to go into. And if you decide to leave a specific breakout room and join another one, you'll have that option as well.
Okay, so the groups again are the group 1 is investors, group 2 is managers, group 3 is boards, and group 4 is government. So we'll see you in there in a minute.
That was really quick.
That was really quick, but we got somewhere. We're going to go back in and dive back in. So is everybody back now? All right. So I don't know if you all were using the Google Sheet or if you want to share that or just talk. The first group was Young Me and focused on investors. So who would like to tell us about what you talked about?
I think Maria, wait,
She's on mute.
Yeah,
Maria,
sorry. I'm wondering if Arturo or Amy want to actually do the recap. I'm putting notes from our conversation in the spreadsheet right now. I took notes on because I couldn't
thank you.
them and type, but so I'm putting some notes in there. I'm not sure I can really do it justice. I mean, I'm happy to give it a whirl if
yeah, why don't you start us off and we'll chime in.
Okay, so well then we had some conversation about investors essentially investing for profit versus doing it for impact, the difference between a longer economic return versus a higher social outcome. With a little bit of debate, I'm not sure there was agreement around older versus younger individual investors. There may be generational differences. Older folks who maybe grew up in the 60s wanting to change the world are now worried about how they're going to pay for Medicare and or who's going to pay for Medicare. Amy talked about the need for standards and metrics that she's part of a human capital management coalition, if I got that right. And there's a lot of talk and every Wall Street firm is involved with ESG investing, but there are no standards. It's the Wild West, a chaotic number of tools, and we need to do something about how to measure what's going on. Arturo talked about the conversation in terms of three kinds of investments: cash, knowledge and expertise, how to fix problems, and social investments, mentoring, social capital kinds of things, and that maybe a venture capital investor may have all three of those, but may only have the knowledge, but doesn't have the cash or the sort of social capital. So that was an interesting conversation. Let me see, I'm just reading my notes here. He also talked about the Federal Reserve and CDFIs and more of an emphasis in community investments and health disparities and quality of life, and that these things matter. And we have to, again, it comes back to how do we measure some of this? And I'm sort of, I guess I answered the question of why, when I would normally be in the government group, I was in this group. And part of that is, I spend so much time thinking about how governments can help workers and what's going on with the labor market these days. And is there more worker leverage, or is that just a COVID blip? Whether the intent of corporations to do this kind of investing is sincere or just window dressing, and what's going on there. And let me see. And Young Me talked also about there's too much that happens around these conversations in silos, and that we need really cross-silo conversations like what's going on in this group. And that was when I sort of panicked and realized I hadn't put anything in the spreadsheet yet. So I'm sorry if there was more I missed, but that's the recap from my perspective.
Maria, you did a fantastic job, I have to say.
I agree.
Hey, A+. Okay, so does anybody else from that group want to add anything? Young Me, Arturo, whoever else was in that group?
Just that, from my perspective, it was much too short. We were just getting warmed up.
Yeah, well, you're going to go back in. So if you want to continue that conversation. Okay, the second group was Sam talking about managers. What are managers dealing with?
Yeah, we would second. We could probably, we were action packed up until we came back to the breakout rooms. I'm going to pass it to Nalini, who's going to walk us through some of our takeaways.
Yeah, please chime in, Sam, as I go. It was very interesting. We talked about real challenges you face as a manager because there's always a conflict between the goals within your group, your team versus the broader organizational goals and across the organization. Trying without enough training, without enough background, the manager feels unsafe to make these decisions in a very as Janet was pointing out, there is these unwritten ground rules, what you cannot do. And if you do, there's a sense of fear of if I give this employee this flexibility or this ability to change the way they work, how I deal with the team. And a lot of them come with not much training, which again prevents them from making a decision, an informed decision. They would rather have a clear set of guidelines rather than have the autonomy to, when you tell them go make the decision that best fits your group, there is a sense of unease because they don't know what can and I cannot do. When it comes to the health of the employees, they don't know what the HIPAA rules are. Can I say this? Can I not say this? How do I deal if the conversation gets very personal? So there, even if the manager has these training and there is a sense of fear that keeps them from not functioning. That's the challenge they face, but we always, what we felt is if the managers invested enough, they can cause a ripple effect. They can have the conversation with the team as a whole to figure out what the work needs to be done rather than see the roles as being so separate and siloed. It could come into a common understanding, create a team where each can help instead of saying, oh, this person is an older person at home, has to go every other day. And now I have to take the workload of that person. So rather than create a friction, try and create a harmony so everybody can support in achieving the goal of the group. Because 40% or more are going to have older parents. There is the mental health issue. There is the stress of working hybrid with younger children. That is, and then there's also, if the old organization does not have diversity, how I, as a single manager, contribute towards it. So there is a lot of conflict between the culture within the organization, where the role of the organization becomes important, where the culture itself allows the manager to make these decisions in hiring, in seeking a new addition, or in training and upskilling the employee. So the person who does not have enough skills gets more of an opportunity compared to another team member who already has the skill to perform the job. And I think Walmart and Whole Foods, we discussed, we're doing a good job giving more autonomy to the managers who are closer to the scene and supporting them in making these changes. And I think I captured most of it, but please chime in, Sam, if
You nailed it.
thank
Great
you.
job. Thanks, Nalini. All right, anybody from that group want to add anything? Okay, so Sharon Hellman had talked about boards.
Yes, so you can see we had notes are in the spreadsheet, and Linda is going to share what we discussed in our session.
And other people, please do chime in as we go along here. We started with the fact that in general, boards lack diversity. So to be able to address some of these issues that we've been talking about, it's not inherent in the boards the way they are currently constituted. And board members are often, well, usually drawn from their path, from people who have past successes, and they are not fully educated on the issues that the companies are and corporations and nonprofits are facing over the long term today. So that in a way puts boards really behind and struggling for relevance. the board members also often have competing priorities because many of them are either still employed in executive positions or still tied to their former activities. And so they may not see what the needs of the company where their board members are. So this gives a lack of alignment between the needs of the company and the boards. And boards with blinders aren't helping companies. So there's also a difference we talked about between the large corporations and the smaller corporations or startups. And more often the large corporations have the freedom to begin to address some of these issues, but the startups and the smaller corporations are constrained by having to focus on being profitable to stay viable and to begin to have a floor of stability for their organizations. But that's a conundrum, because if they can't focus on some of the social and environmental issues as well, they aren't going to stay around to become larger corporations or even to become long-term small companies. As to organizations that are doing this well, one of the organizations that I had mentioned and talked about that you don't typically think about is the Federal Reserve. And I'm going to put into the chat for everybody a link to one of the well, it's a 10-month so far, a virtual conferencing that they've done on all of the social issues and the relationship to the economy. One of the groups talked about their community investment, and this is part of the Fed's community investment, and about half of the Feds are very active in this. And that is beginning to ripple through to some of the other organizations and companies that they work with. And that's a good thing. We also talked about the social and global impact of different industries, and we're talking about the consumer and retail and hospitality seem to be more in tune with the needs of moving forward and addressing some of the reskilling and some of the social needs and some of the desires of employees, and that employees are looking to have meaning in their work. But what we wanted to emphasize also is that this is an ongoing process. It's never going to be finished. So that where people, organizations and boards are not where they need to be right now, they still have the opportunity to continue to grow and continue to work on this, and to work intergenerationally, to learn from each other, to realize that the corporation is everybody. It's the boards, it's the executives, it's the managers, it's all of the line employees, it's everybody working together. And that the success is going to come when everyone has a sense of, yeah, this is a good place to be. I belong here. But anybody want to add anything here?
Wow, that was amazing, Linda.
Yeah,
I love
great
where you closed
summary,
it.
Linda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And finally, last but not least, we have government. Maria.
Yes, and please, anybody feel free to jump right in. What we discussed about what are the biggest challenges is one, we discussed policy adaptation, how work was tied to healthcare. It's a national issue. We need to revamp some policy labor laws. We wanted to know what constitutes health in work environments and how to keep people working to keep healthcare benefits and maybe uncouple that. There's also training and education, and they're all governed by different laws and are defined differently. What is successful? Is a program successful or are people successful? Do we need to change the metrics or the system? The next thing we discussed is workforce and government may have a lack of flexibility. Is government too far behind in implementing changes? How do we get systems to intersect and get rid of the old systems like civil service? Do we need to look at the needs of an organization, get rid of duplication, and how to break borders down, i.e. school boards in each town? There's programs at the state and the focus needs to be on success, not just completing the program. People need to learn. The opportunity needs to be taken seriously. Does a person really want to take a course of training? Are they passionate about it? What is the level of engagement? One other thing we discussed a little bit is how to get politics out of the way, which is very difficult to do. And we see that just with COVID. So there's income disparity versus income equity. You got to pay people better and you get better production. And we have to have the policy narrative go all the way down to the local level. So anybody else? Those are the notes I took.
Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go back into I know we were cut short. Let's take a half hour and we'll come back at 11:40. 11:40. Okay, and this time with the same facilitators, we're going to focus on with Young Me customers. That's an important stakeholder. Sam with employees, Sharon with executives, and myself with communities. You can join the same group you were in before, or which is fine, or you can join a different group. Okay, well, Deborah will start the groups. We had phenomenal conversations around the community, and let's hear from the various groups and what did customers have to say? Young Me, who's going to be talking for customers.
Yeah, I think that, I'm going to let Maria and Arturo co-chair this. Maria always wants to pass the buck, but she does such an excellent job. And she's, really already thinking about all of these issues, although she claims that she's not an expert, but I don't buy that.
Yeah, all the flattery and schmoozing there. All right. Well, I did take notes that I will put in the spreadsheet. Didn't do that yet, but so we talked about the definition of consumers as expanding. It's not just the sort of buying something in the narrow marketplace, but also about consumers becoming more activists, and the companies are trying to get the influencers, whether it's Facebook and TikTok, and that we have an increasingly fragmented marketplace anyway. And so this is really a transitional moment. We had some conversation about consumers as investors. They may have money in pension funds, and there's a lack of transparency though. So they may want more information, but it's very hard to, one of the challenges is getting good transparent information. Talk a little bit about greenwashing, and everybody's trying to put this sheen on their companies, just like some of what's going on with some DEI initiatives. And I have a note here about woke washed, which was that a book title or a thing? So I'm going to go look that up.
I can send you the link to the person. It's Katie Martell, who is creating a documentary of the brands that are claiming this, but then behaving badly. And so she's really, calling, the press is already calling them out, but people forget in an instant. So she's making a documentary about that. Yeah.
Okay, so once again, this is a group that I wouldn't traditionally join, but I'm trying to get outside my comfort zone a little bit. So, I talked a little bit about, whether it's easier to shop at Walmart versus the time and the extra money, and I don't have the ability to research maybe, Black-owned companies. Like my daughter tries very hard to shop at small businesses where she knows that they have these standards and they're supporting equity issues, and I'm busy and I got kids and I'm at work and I'm sometimes just so how do we balance social impact versus essentially sometimes cheap goods? I mentioned a book that I'll put a couple of book links in the notes there. And now I have to read some of my notes. We had a very energetic conversation. So, that Arturo was talking about how we're consumers, not just of the item that we buy, but of the environmental practices of a company, of the healthcare that they provide or don't provide to their workers, of the impact of all of their processes on society. And so we have to really have a broader definition of consumers, ideally maybe being conscious consumers. And interestingly, so having kind of, I don't want to say badmouthed Walmart, but I mean, there were, both Youngmi and Arturo talked about Walmart is doing a lot for its employees in terms of skill development, and also play a gigantic role in, for example, the transition from LED to incandescent to LED lights. So if they make this decision, consumers sort of have to get swept up in buying maybe more environmentally friendly lights, even though I really hate the way they look. But, with great power comes great responsibility. Shout out to Spider-Man, I guess, there. And let me see. That there are more opportunities these days for smaller businesses and networks, and we can learn from some nonprofit initiatives such as a Wikipedia. An interesting conversation again about the need for transparency and understanding where, when you buy, say, a watermelon for $5, if you buy it down the street at a local farmer, that whole $5 goes to the farmer. If you buy it at Whole Foods, that organic farmer may get $2 from the watermelon and the rest goes to other costs. Or if you live in Alaska and not New Jersey, it may cost you $10, of which only $1 goes to the farmer and the rest goes to transportation, et cetera. So, that I guess Arturo's wife, if I understood correctly, has some involvement with the Canadian food price impacts. And Youngmi also talked about there's a push starting to grow around salary transparency. Maybe we really do need more of an understanding of price transparency. I mean, where does your money go when you buy different items? And then I'll wrap up with the last part was around sort of American culture, around individualism and self-sufficiency versus more collective cultures, where there may be the provision of healthcare is something they value, and whether it's food prices and other consumables, there's a more collective mentality that we seem to be lacking. So we also talked, which Amy was talking about, and I agree completely about, we talked about company towns where management lived in the town and worked in the town and knew everybody and contributed to the local whatevers in the town versus getting increasingly separated. And the same thing happens with the stuff we buy. I mean, if it was produced locally and that's very different from the sort of being very far separated from our both produce and other consumable items. My guys, feel free to jump in. I think I've way talked too much.
No, that was outstanding, really interesting and powerful.
Maria, I think you're one of the best reporters I've ever seen in terms of open session.
Poor Maria. Okay. All right. Let's hear from who is looking at employees in Sam's group.
Sure. I'm going to share out for us, Jeanette, Nalini, and Mukesh. We came together and had a conversation on employees. Biggest challenges we saw were a few. One was around learning opportunities that vary based off wage level of a worker. Is a major challenge today, depending on where you are within the organization. Definitely impacts the amount of opportunities you have to upskill, reskill, cross-train. And it's crazy given the amount of technology we have today. Second thing we talked about is the challenges in aligning the actions and behaviors towards like real measurements today, where you're really kind of rethinking and looking at job descriptions to understand where where job descriptions today make the most sense. Maybe there are functions that no longer make sense and are not necessarily tying to outcomes. Kind of like the way we're doing it is the way it's always been done type of stuff. And three is that a real challenge is automation's impact on current job functions and roles outpacing new solutions. If you think about the recent jobs report that missed on retail target at a time when you would expect retail hiring to be soaring, makes you wonder if companies have figured out a way to do more with less during the COVID moment. So a real challenge or risk is automation's impact on certain job functions that have been accelerated during COVID. The organization, we didn't maybe come up with a specific logo or brand that we thought is doing this really well, but we talked about workforce development centers in certain cities that have found a way. I spoke specifically about Newark, that works really hard to stay connected to local partners, whether it's Samsung, Prudential, Audible. These workforce development centers are challenged by churn of the people that are in roles responsible for training and intake and transition. But these programs are really critical as we think about getting every worker opportunities. On the opportunities to address these issues, the first thing we said was companies should, and this was Jeanette really talked about this, like we should really come together. In a perfect world, to better align on a new contract for work. The challenge is everybody kind of doing their own thing and not finding a way to come maybe together more publicly. That's an opportunity. There's obviously stuff happening here, but getting a critical mass of multiple companies heading in the same direction as we think about future of work. Other thing we said for opportunities is rethinking wage and hour rules today that were built in a time to protect workers and in some ways maybe restrict workers' opportunities. Last thing we said is better conversations with workers about how they want work to work. Oftentimes the conversation comes top down, but trying to create opportunities to survey, to have roundtables, to have more discussions with workers on the front line, living their job every day, to understand. I always tap into my company and ask workers, what's the high impact, low effort stuff? What's the low impact, high effort stuff? And we should stop doing the low impact, high effort stuff. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't ask that question. How do we create better dialogue with our workers? Any other items to share from our group?
Good job.
Fantastic. Okay. And the third group is executives.
Thank you. So we spoke about in our group, the first question for biggest challenges that the executives are facing boils down to a few factors. Number one, lack of buy-in from fellow peers. Number two could be that executives oftentimes look for reference points, which could come from more so like news headlines and some more eye-catching pieces or macro headings, as Ram stated, but executives aren't necessarily activated until they're sought out for sign-off or decision-making from their teams. So would they always be proactive in this sense? That can sometimes be a big challenge. A positive, though, that did come out from Sharon's perspective is that sometimes the executive level will find that they're a bit more of a competitive group, especially in order to reach that level, which can be actually a positive challenge in the sense that they're really looking to advance and reaching the goals and pushing themselves to remain in that position or to justify why they're in that position. And so then it begged a great question of, is there equal opportunity provided for all people to be able to reach this executive level? You need the diversification of backgrounds, but also experiences that are really important. And some folks may need to put themselves out there a bit more in order to reach those positions eventually in their career paths, if they ever do. And then another piece that came into play here was without any action plans or solid evidence, sometimes people are really hesitant to take action. So when you have diversity studies or pay equity scales that come into play, are we ready to go for implementation? You know, who's in the hot seat or being held accountable for making changes based on the results of those studies? And then I think Edith summarized it best with always a huge factor that comes into play with challenges would be budget issues around addressing some of these pieces. And then we moved into some organizations that are doing this well, would be within the government and public sector, such as the United Nations, the World Health Organizations, really making some large grand scale promises or commitments that is very eye-catching from their executive group. You'll also find consumer industries that are consumer industry focused organizations that tend to do this well because of the accountability that's being held to them from the market. And those that have cross-generational representation, that those executives who are more known or making contributions to the world. So a topic or an individual that came to mind for this would be like an Elon Musk. While he himself may be controversial in his personal life, a lot of the commitments and efforts that he's making to actually advance, you know, different areas, whether it's space travel or sustainability, you'll find that he is certainly a hot topic and a household name at this point. And then for opportunities to address this from a local, national, and global level, most importantly came around trying to leverage technology as a solution, but really making sure that we're removing the biases that come with AI. So we need to, I think Ram phrased this really well, we need to course correct biases to not have technology make mistakes 1,000 times faster. So that I think was a really good tagline there. We need to look at cross-level, cross-business focus groups and listening sessions to bring together these different backgrounds and stories, which could work really well locally and tie into like our employee resource groups or other key constituents that we have within our organizations. But so much of this really boils down to awareness, especially with DEI, to be able to educate employees in conversations and spaces they may not personally be as familiar with. And then lastly was breaking down silos between stakeholders. So those would be some of the big pieces there for addressing this.
Fantastic. Well, every single group talked about breaking down silos and listening and expanding borders, et cetera. And so we only have a couple of minutes, but between Linda and Maria, who wants to report out on the government group? Sorry, the communities group, communities.
I will, if Linda wants to jump in or anybody want to jump in, that's fine.
Go ahead.
How communities are fractured, and we talked about going from me to we. There's a fracturing of business and as well as community and people. What happens when employees cannot move, when a corporation or whatever entity moves out of the community? People that are left, the community is negatively impacted, and many times there's no regard for people. So the disconnect between the corporation and the communities where people want to work. But we discussed where there was one company that produced light bulbs. They were closing down their Mexico plant, but they reskilled their employees. Also coal miners, we can reskill those employers. Then we wanted to know, what does diversity mean? There's a zero-sum win-lose versus community and inclusiveness. There's a weakening of community advocacy. There's a lack of dialogue between community government and people. Again, where me is prioritized and valued over we. And we discussed the lack of respect across the board. We have disinclusion by municipalities of people who've been designated as essential workers in input sessions. And Linda actually talked about this. Maybe she might want to continue that discussion, where we talk about tolerance and everyone needs the opportunity to engage. Linda, please.
Yeah, I was using as an example what happened that I was aware of about use of ARPA funds, and particularly when the opportunity came along to discuss the any kind of use for increasing the benefits from the economy and reskilling and upskilling in communities. And it was the input sessions that I was aware of were round up the usual people. And so that the people who are designated as essential workers in our communities were not included. So it was a group of employers and municipal government employees saying, we know what the essential workers need and want. And we're not going to talk with them because we already know what they want, and this is what we're going to give them. And so that lack of inclusion, I don't think bodes well for the future. And I think it's something that we can change.
Okay, we're just about out of time. We're going to keep this Google Sheet alive, right, Deborah? So that everybody can add to it, and we'll send it out in an email. So everybody has the link and can edit and to add. So I don't want to rush everybody. I know some of you still want to add more notes, and we'll keep it alive for a little bit. And I just want to thank everybody for your incredible participation. I thought today's conversation was amazing, and I'm very committed to moving forward with this. And the responsible business framework and everything you shared today, I think will be invaluable in that regard. So thank you. Thank you, facilitators. Thank you, Sam, Sharon, Young Me, and everyone for your participation. I really appreciate. And I hope you have a wonderful, safe holiday, and happy holidays.
Thank you, Gina and Deborah.
Thanks.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank
Happy
you.
holidays, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye now. Have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. See you next year.